Welcome back to another episode of Local Search Tuesdays. This week I'm sharing my presentation from last week's Ignition Automotive Conference in Dallas. Last week we held the second annual Ignition Automotive Conference in Dallas, and it was a huge hit. The top speakers in automotive all came to town and gave epic presentations packed with awesome tips for dealers. I did something a bit different this time, concentrating more on common SEO mistakes that dealers make instead of just preaching about best practices. Sometimes knowing what doesn't work will help you learn more about good SEO than just hearing what the best practices tell you to do. So here we go. This is the most common SEO mistakes made by dealerships. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at SearchLab, but you probably already know that because you're watching this on my video series. But in case it's the first time you're watching, I do have a weekly video series. Comes out every Tuesday, short 3 to 5 minute clips typically. Obviously, this one will be longer because it's an entire conference presentation. And also, I'm lucky enough that I get to speak at a lot of conferences all over the world, but unfortunately, sometimes these conferences are pay to play, so the person that pays to get to speak is really just a salesperson and they're up on stage just pitching their products, and that's no fun. We're not going to do that. But also, those salespeople typically have no design elements whatsoever in their presentation. So it's a white background with black Arial font, and they pack every slide with bullet points, and they just read bullet points for the entire presentation. And they've actually done scientific studies to prove that bullet points kill kittens, so we're going to keep all the kitties safe today. And those of you that are a little bit older will understand the movie reference there from the beginning. This was Invasion of the Body Snatchers, epic movie. But every time I do a presentation, I love to share my love of movies with my love of digital marketing. So there's always a theme, and today's theme is science fiction movies. And typically I go back and include at least one movie for every year in the last 50 years. But because we're doing sci-fi movies, we got to have all the Planet of the Apes movies, which means I've got to go back 56 years. So we've got all the Planet of the Apes, all the Star Wars, all the Star Trek, all the really fun stuff. So let's get this going. Are you watching this because you need a hand with SEO? Are you spending too much time looking up at your competition ranking higher in search results? SEO is kind of a tough puzzle to crack, and unfortunately, far too many dealerships try to just coast along with minimal effort, which ends up making them virtually invisible. And they blend into the background. And when you're invisible to your potential customers, you're not going to be getting any leads and you're not going to be making any sales. But I don't want you to freak out and lose your head. I'm here today to help. There's a lot of misinformation out there about SEO, though. So I'm going to help you dig through the giant pile of crap that's online to understand what really works. In fact, you could almost say I'm giving you a peek under the hood and letting you see how Google's matrix actually functions. I've been talking about local SEO at pretty much every automotive conference for over a decade, and Google makes a lot of changes, over 3,000 a year for the last few years, but really the basics, the things that I've been talking about for a decade haven't really changed. So why is it that most dealers and most of the vendors that sell automotive SEO still suck? They don't do a good job. You've got to understand how things have changed as Google's algorithm has evolved, and putting a bunch of keywords in a bunch of different places isn't SEO, and it hasn't been for a long time. It's optimizing the human experience on your website. Plus, it's important because we know that customers shop around. The latest data from Google says that the average new car buyer will conduct 27 separate website sessions of research before they get far enough down the funnel to submit their information through a lead form or a chat or show up at the dealership. So we know that they're going to be shopping around and seeing your competition. You've got to have a better website and a better experience if you want to win. You just can't do the assembly line cookie cutter approach anymore. Every dealership's unique. Every location is unique. So you need a customized SEO strategy if you want to win in today's market. So today I'm going to do something different. I've been telling you how to do the basics for years, but I think if we talk about the most common mistakes that we see, that will help you, because if you know what not to do, will put you more in the right direction of what you should be doing. So I'm going to share the common problems that we've seen from running our SEO scoring matrix on over 1,200 dealerships in the last few years. The scoring matrix is basically a small local SEO audit that I designed for when I speak at 20 groups. And I've been using it for a long time at 20 groups to kind of assess the SEO and optimization opportunities on various dealership websites. But before we dive in and start talking about the results, I want to talk about a few basic concepts that will be important. And the first, most important one is that at the most basic level, all Google is a pattern detection program. It goes out and it checks out websites and looks at the patterns and classifies those patterns. So when we're optimizing our sites, we're trying to improve our digital pattern. And if we then study the pattern and compare that to the sites that rank higher and the sites that rank lower, we can get more insight into which things really move the needle. So what's going to have an effect on your visibility? And we know that for dealerships, we need to be concentrating on Google's local algorithm. It's a completely separate algorithm from the traditional algorithm, which means it's a different way of doing SEO because you have to target different things, and the elements that the algorithm evaluates are weighted differently. And we know that dealers need local SEO because any searches related to dealerships are automatically localized. I did this search for my office for the phrase Ford dealer, and I didn't say near me and I didn't say Plano, and it gave me the 3 closest dealerships to my physical location. But don't fall into the trap of thinking that doing local SEO means you're just doing regular SEO and then adding a couple of things on your Google business profile. It's a completely different way of writing website content. It's a completely different way of optimizing the site. It's building different kinds of links, and customer reviews are actually part of that local algorithm signal. And those are the elements that we evaluate in the scoring matrix. And then the scores of the 4 areas are weighted to then give you an approximation of the importance of each section to Google's local algorithm. So we have the on-site score, which is evaluating the content that's on your site and how that content is optimized. And that's for a maximum of 44 points. And then we have the inbound link score, which is evaluating all the links that are pointed to your site from other websites. That's a maximum of 10 points. And then we've got the Google Business Profile section, which obviously evaluates your GBP and how it's optimized. That can give you up to 32 points. And then customer reviews on Google and Yelp and how you respond to those reviews can give you up to another 14 points. When we add all the scores together, that means you'll end up with a total score of anywhere in the range from 0 to 100 points. Although you can do worse because it's possible to lose points. When we're scoring the various elements, if something is incorrect and it's something that is either possibly or definitely hurting your visibility in search results, you'll actually lose points instead of just not getting any points. But it's pretty much impossible to score a perfect 100. In fact, the highest score we've ever seen is an 83.6, and that's one of our own clients. If we're looking at sites that our team doesn't handle or work on, the highest non-client score we've ever seen is just a 65. And the lowest score we've ever seen was a Toyota dealership in California with a negative 71.5. And even worse, they were paying $5,000 a month for SEO. The average score for all the dealerships that we've run this on, which is 1,274 dealerships, basically since the beginning of 2022, the average score is only 12.5 points out of a maximum possible score of 100. So really not good. And that score's trending lower. In 2023, the average score was 14.4. And in 2022, the average was 22.5. So that could just be a function of, as we've scored more sites, we're scoring more sites that have worse optimization. But going back and looking, I think it's a more accurate interpretation that the state of optimization on dealership websites is decreasing. It's getting worse over time. And then one of the things that we evaluate or ask the dealers is whether or not they're doing SEO with a vendor partner or handling it in-house at the dealership or not doing SEO at all. And the average score for people that told us they were using a vendor was just 10.5 out of 100. And the average score for people doing it in-house was a little bit lower than that. But then you can see there's a huge drop for people that don't do SEO, but that's not really that surprising. And then we can break down the averages per area. So the average score for on-site It's not even a full point out of 44 points. So the 0.2 out of 44, if we're doing math to see what we got on our high school test, we got a 0.5% for content. And the average score for links is just 0.5 out of 10. That's easy math. That's 5%. The average score for Google Business Profiles was 7.5 points out of a possible 32. That's 23%. And then the average score for reviews is 4.5 points out of 14, which is 32%. And the most important thing when it comes to SEO and trying to show up better in searches is the content on your website, but that's the lowest score by far for dealerships. So that shows that the most important thing is the thing that is most often not handled correctly. And it's important to look at the website providers in the study as well. So among the 1,274 dealerships, 28% were on dealer.com, almost 24% on Dealer Inspire, 20% on Dealer On, and then it drops significantly once you get past the top three. Ansira, CDK, whatever you want to call it, 6.7%, Dealery Process down at almost 5%, and then everyone else was too low of a number to be statistically relevant, so we grouped them all together at 16%. So these are the most common problems that we've seen while we've scored these dealerships over the last 2.5 years. A lot of dealerships are not updating the default page content that they get from their website provider when they sign up for that particular website. So we see stuff like this. This is just the default award-winning service, blah, 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 BS content that's on tons and tons and tons of websites. It's really important to make sure that you update the content on your site and make it unique and make it actually be about your dealership and what's different about you and what sets you apart from the competition. We also saw a ton of dealerships that had hardly any content and a ton of dealerships that didn't have any content on a page. We also saw a ton of dealerships that did not have a traditional image that's embedded with the IMG tag on the page. And that's important because Google expects that every page would have at least one embedded image on it. And a lot of the website providers are embedding images as the background of a div element, which doesn't get rendered the same way by Google and makes it look like there aren't any images on the page. And we also saw a lot of dealerships that didn't even have that. There was literally no image on the page whatsoever, and it was just a wall of text. And the thing you need to think about, if you don't have good content on your site, Google has nothing to index, and you're not going to show any search results. But even more importantly, let's not talk about the Google side of things. If you don't have good content on your site, you're not going to be able to answer your customers' questions, which means you're going to get fewer leads. And those customers are going to go buy from the competition instead. So another really important, simple concept to remember when you're thinking about SEO and Google and how Google works. If you want to show up as a search result when somebody types in a particular keyword phrase, then you need a page of content that's about that singular concept on your site. And that page should be the best answer to the question that the searcher is asking, but it doesn't have to be the best answer on the internet. It just needs to be the best answer in your local area. And if you're writing the best answer, you should probably answer some of the subsequent questions that that potential customer would have after they got their initial answer. And it's really important to remember you should be writing every piece of content for humans, and then you turn around and optimize it for Google. If you're just writing content because you want to show up in Google, then that's not the right way to do it. And if you're working with an SEO vendor that's just giving you content and telling you it's good for Google, but you look at it and it's not anything that a customer would care about or doesn't answer customer questions, then you're not doing it the right way. But when you do optimize these pages, remember, I said if you want to show up as a search result, when somebody types in a phrase, you need a page of content about that singular concept on your site. It's really important to think one concept per page, and that ties through to location as well. So when you optimize, you should optimize for the same keyword phrase and the same city in each of the page elements throughout the page. Don't mix it up. That's a bad pattern. And remember, Google is pattern detection. One of the big mistakes that we saw on almost every site, dealerships would put multiple cities in a title tag and or multiple cities in the H1 heading. And you're not going to show up in 3 or 4 cities because you've got a title tag that has 3 or 4 cities in it, or an H1 with 3 or 4 cities in it. It just doesn't work that way. We also saw tons of dealerships with mismatched keywords. So they'd optimize for service department in the title tag and oil change in the H1 heading. So you're talking about 2 different concepts. Or they would swap the cities out and have one city in the title tag and another city in the H1 heading and another city in the content. So make sure it's the same stuff throughout the page. And we also saw tons and tons of dealerships that were adding content around concepts that they already ranked really well for. So if you already show up well for a particular search, you should be adding content that will enhance your visibility and give you more visibility in search results. Adding more content around that same concept that you already ranked number 1 for isn't going to help you. Another way to put it, if you're in a small town and you're the only Ford dealer in town, you never need to add Ford dealer content or Ford model content because there's no competition. You are the only person that's going to show up if someone is looking for Ford. So think about the content that you're adding and make sure that it makes sense based on your location and your strategy. And think about what you can potentially show up for as well. A lot of dealerships will add these crappy little blog posts with just a few hundred words about the new F-150. Well, if someone's looking for information about the new F-150, a couple of hundred words in one picture isn't going to satisfy the intent of what that person's looking for. So Google's never going to show that page. Google's always going to go to the Ford manufacturer site or to a site like Car and Driver or Auto Trader. That's a big authoritative site that's going to have tons and tons of information about that particular model. So adding new model information on blog posts isn't really effective unless you're using those as landing pages for social campaigns, and then it makes sense. But if you're just doing it for SEO purposes or even for customer purposes, it's not going to work. Vehicle features doesn't really work either. Or, what are the color options of this new Mazda model? Okay, you don't even need to write a blog post about that because all of that information is on the manufacturer site already anyway, and you're never going to outrank the manufacturer site. So make sure you're adding content for concepts that you have the opportunity to show up for. We also saw a ton of dealerships that would optimize their website for a city that's 45 minutes away, an hour away. We saw one 2 weeks ago that their entire website was optimized around a city that was an hour and a half away from their location. And sure, I sort of understand the direction that they were thinking because they were in a smaller town and the closest big metro market was an hour and a half away. But remember, Google is pattern detection and Google knows exactly where you're located. And just because you put that city when you optimize your site doesn't mean Google's going to display you as the best result in that city, because Google has your Google business profile and knows where you're located, and you're an hour and a half away. It's not that likely people are going to drive that far. So think about the locations that you're targeting as well. And we saw a lot of dealers that would add in these really crappy, useless city pages because they think it's going to make them rank in all these cities. Like this one, this Mercedes dealer in Long Island is proud to serve these surrounding cities. And it's just a list of every city around New York and Long Island. That's not going to help. That doesn't help your customers. This was on the homepage of their website. Doesn't help your customers, and it's not going to make you show up in those cities anyway. So don't do that stuff on your site. You're not going to rank for searches in another city just because you added a bunch of pages of shitty content about that city. Also, we saw a lot of dealers trying to optimize for near me focused searches. And that doesn't really work, because if someone searches for a dealership near me or oil change near me or anything near me, they're explicitly telling Google that they want something that is physically close to their location where they are when they did the search. So if you're physically close to them, you're going to show up whether you put near me on the page or not. If you're not physically close to them, you're still not going to show up. And putting, "Are you looking for an oil change near me?" at the top of your oil change page doesn't even read correctly, because near me is first person. The person reading it, that means they're saying near me for them would be near you on the website. So get the grammar right too, because poor grammar on your site doesn't help anybody. We saw tons of sites that didn't have an H1 heading, and the H1 heading is the second most important element on your page behind the title tag. We saw tons of sites that have hidden H1 headings. Or weird setups like dealer.com will make the dealership logo in the header next to the menu an H1 heading. So the first H1 heading on every single page of your site is just the name of the dealership. And that's a horrible pattern. Or DealerOn, for some reason, has added hidden H1 headings on all the pages of their site, where it'll have an H1 heading in the code, but it doesn't show visually on the page. And Google renders your page when it indexes your page. And so if Google sees in the code that there's an H1 heading that isn't displayed to humans, that's actually something called cloaking. It's really bad, and it's potentially or probably most likely hurting your visibility if you're on that platform. We also saw tons of homepage slideshows with lots and lots and lots of images. And realistically, you shouldn't even have a homepage slideshow. Sure, some of the manufacturers ask you to have one. And if you have to have one to be compliant, just put 2 images in it. There's usually not any sort of requirement for number of images. No human is going to get past the second image. Customers don't land and just sit there and watch your slideshow to see what you've got in your slideshow. And the more images you watch, the more it slows your page down. And you're just slowing it down for no reason because nobody's going to see those images anyway. So customers aren't going to watch it. Customers aren't going to click on it. So don't have it on your site. It doesn't help customers. It doesn't help SEO. We also saw a vast majority of the dealerships did not have a blog and weren't blogging. And you've got to have a blog, because if you're only writing about the cars that you sell and the service that you're providing, that's really bottom of funnel content. That means you're only going to show up for somebody that is looking to buy right now. What about all those people that haven't made the decision yet, but they're starting to get into market? You need content to target those mid to upper funnel shoppers. And it doesn't make sense to put that content on the main menu of your site. So that content should go on your blog. So you need to target people, because the sooner you get eyeballs on your website and impress them with how awesome your website is and how amazing your dealership is, the more likely you are to be in consideration when they get down to that decision level of the funnel. And please don't go in on your blog and just shove in city names where they don't even really make sense grammatically or conceptually, because you're just trying to target a local search. Like this dealership, experiencing luxurious power with the 2024 Ford Super Duty F-250 Lariat near Prattville, Alabama. Okay, well, customers don't search for a topic near a city anyway. They either search for topic in city or topic in city. They don't search near a city. And notice all of these are near a city, near a city, near a city. Like, discover the 2024 Ranger Lariat near Hoover, Alabama. Is the Ranger Lariat that is at this dealership near Hoover different than the Ranger Lariat everywhere else? No. So why would you add the city name in there? It just doesn't make sense. And no one's going to search for these concepts anyway, so why would you do them? Then we look at inbound links as well and how many other websites are linking to your site. The average number of websites linking to the dealerships in the study was 257 sites. And it's really important to understand that Google doesn't care as much about how many links you have. It's more about how many individual websites are linking to you. Because once you've gotten a link from a website, there's diminishing return and getting more and more links from that same site. So when you're evaluating your links, or when your SEO partner is talking to you about links, you should really concentrate more on how many unique websites are linking to you and pay less attention to the total number of links. And because we're targeting the local algorithm, you really want to try to acquire links from local businesses and local websites, because those are the most valuable to Google's local algorithm. And most of the dealerships didn't have any local links at all. They were working with SEO providers that were just getting them random crappy links that weren't really going to affect anything. And reviews are an important signal. We mentioned that earlier. The average number of reviews for the dealers that we audited was 1,174 reviews, and the average score was a 4.6. And you should be responding to all your reviews, but we saw a significant number of dealerships that just didn't respond to any of their bad reviews. They'd respond to every positive review, but they wouldn't respond to any bad reviews. And those review responses are incredibly important. And even worse than not responding, we saw tons of dealerships with horrible responses to bad reviews, where they would just cut and paste the same thing to every single bad review. That's something like, hey, we're sorry we didn't give you the stellar experience that we strive for. If you could call me and give me more details, I'm Greg, the service manager, and here's my phone number. And if you put that on every single bad review, you look worse than not putting a response, because you just look lazy and like you don't care. And you already know that customer They were at your store. You've got their information. You should be dealing with them offline if they left you a bad review. Your response to the bad review is for every potential customer in the future that wants to see how you handled a bad situation. And when you first get to your Google Business Profile reviews, and there's that default sort order before you click you want the newest reviews or the best reviews or the worst reviews. A local SEO agency did some research last year, and they found out that if a review has a photo uploaded along with it, it's stickier and it stays in that default order for a longer period of time. And if a review is longer and has more text, it will stay in the default sort order for a longer period of time. And that's a little bit problematic because most bad reviews are much longer than the good reviews. And then you can give upvotes to reviews. And if a review has 2 or more upvotes, then it stays in the default sort order for a longer period of time. So if you have a bad review that shows in that default sort, where it's in the top 5 or 6 reviews that anyone would see if they went to go look at your reviews, you can bury it really quickly by reaching out to someone who recently left you a 5-star review, asking them to update their review with a little bit more story, and ask them to add a photo to their review and let you know when it's done. Once it's done, then you have a couple people at the dealership give it a thumbs up, and boom, it jumps to the top of the list. You do that a couple times, you bury that bad review quickly so it's no longer super visible. It's a really, really effective trick. Another big mistake that we saw was a lot of dealerships just don't pay attention to Yelp at all. You'd be shocked at how many of them didn't even have a claimed and verified Yelp profile. But it's really important to pay attention to Yelp and the reviews on Yelp, because when a customer looks up directions on Apple Maps, the reviews that show on Apple Maps come from Yelp and not from Google. And you don't want to have a mismatch of expectations where a customer found you on Google and you had a really good score and a ton of reviews, but then they look you up on Yelp to come see you and see that you don't have that many reviews and your reviews are pretty awful. You're going to have customers that will reconsider that decision and maybe go to a competitor instead. We also saw a ton of dealers picking the wrong primary category for their Google Business Profile. And according to the most recent local search ranking factor study, and according to just reality from our own experience, the most influential factor when it comes to local SEO is your primary category in your Google Business Profile. So you want to be strategic and pick the right one. We also saw a ton of dealers picking categories that weren't even related to car dealerships. And when you start to choose categories that don't match all the other categories, that's not a good pattern for Google. You're going to cause some problems there. And the categories that you choose, even beyond the primary category, have a massive influence on how you're going to show in search results. So why would you waste space that you could choose other categories that apply and choose things that dealerships don't even do? It doesn't make sense. Some of the really weird ones we saw appraiser. I'm guessing because maybe dealerships think that since they appraise the value of your trade-in, that they could put appraiser there, but appraiser is a totally different type of business. Or we saw car service. Okay, car service is not service department. Car service is like calling a car to come pick you up, like Uber. Or chauffeur service is on a lot of dealerships for some reason, which I don't even know why people would put chauffeur service, because that's not anything any dealership offers. Another one we saw pretty commonly was electric vehicle charging station. I think because dealerships have installed those chargers out front, a lot of dealerships have been told they need to go set up the charging station category, but you shouldn't do that. You don't want some rando from off the street just pulling in and taking up a space right in front of your building to charge their car at random times during the day. And there's only 10 categories that apply to vehicle sales, and there are more than 10 categories that would fit that classification for dealerships. So you're putting something in there that you really don't want to show up for and not putting something in that you do want to show up for. So it just doesn't make sense. And you should also have separate Google Business Profiles set up for your service department and parts department. And a lot of dealerships did not have those set up, or we saw a small percentage of the dealers that had a single separate Google Business Profile department set up for parts and service. But you should really have a separate one for parts and a separate one for service. Google changed the rules several years ago. Google has a pretty strict set of guidelines that outline what criteria a business has to meet to be allowed to have a Google Business Profile. And if you follow those guidelines, dealerships actually aren't allowed to have separate departments for parts and service. But Google understands that those are two separate business centers, and
customers will come in for service and parts more often than they'll come in for purchasing. So they change the rules for dealerships. So if Google is going to change the rules around something related to your Google business profile, there's probably a lot of data that supports them making that decision, and that it's important for dealerships to have that separation. So if Google's going to change the rules just for dealerships and not for any other business out there, it's a pretty good sign you should probably be doing that. You are allowed to set up a separate department for service, a separate one for parts, and a separate one for collision. You are not allowed to set up a used car profile, a financing profile, or something for vehicle acquisition or buying cars. When you set up these separate profiles, it's really important that the main profile all is sales categories, the service profile is all service categories, and the parts profile is all parts categories. Don't mix them and have a few sales categories and then oil change and other things on the same Google Business profile. We also have talked for years about adding UTM tracking on your website link in your Google Business profile because attribution's kind of broken. If no referral information is passed to Google Analytics will report that traffic as direct traffic, but it's actually organic traffic. So if you use UTM tracking on that website link, it will force Google Analytics to correctly attribute that traffic so that you have more specific, exact data about what's going on with your website traffic, which allows you to make better marketing decisions moving forward. And this video will walk you through how to do it if you don't have it set up on your site. And it's important that you include UTM tracking on every link that's in your Google Business profile that points to your website, not just the website link, but all of the other ones like appointments or anything else that you might have. And when you're setting up your UTM tracking, a lot of people are using Google as the source. Make sure you use GBP or GMB or whatever so that at an immediate glance, you can tell the difference between clicks that came in from organic search results and clicks that came in from your Google Business profile or searches in Google Maps or in Map Pack search results. If you have Google and then you just use a campaign variable to differentiate, then you start having to drop down secondary dimensions. And it's just a little bit more work to get to that same information. And make sure that medium is set to organic with a lowercase o because Google Analytics is case sensitive. For some reason, a lot of Ford dealers have social set up as their medium for their Google Business profile, which makes no sense because it's not social media, it's organic searches. So if you're a Ford dealer, check and make sure that your UTMs don't have social and they're set to be organic. And if they do say social, go get that stuff fixed because it's wrong. We also saw a lot of dealerships not answering questions and not uploading their own questions in the questions and answers section on the Google Business profile. Google actually encouraged businesses to upload their own questions when this feature was rolled out in 2017. But for some reason, dealerships aren't doing it. And it's really important to seed those common questions because of the way that the system was built. If a similar question has been asked and answered in the past as someone's typing in a question, Google's going to autocomplete their question and immediately give them an answer. So they're getting an answer faster than what they would get if they were talking to a human or even an AI chatbot. So that's why you want to seed those questions. Ask yourself your own common questions, and a lot of dealers didn't do that. And because it's a discussion-based widget where questions can receive multiple answers, it's important that the primary answer to every question comes from the dealership because it will have the name of the dealership and it will say owner. And the way that you do that is you make sure that your answer has the most thumbs up on it because you can upvote answers. And if the question has multiple answers, Google will only display the primary answer, and then the user will have to click a link to see the remaining answers. So it's a much better experience that every question is answered by the dealership. So make sure that you have the primary answer to every question, which actually isn't very common because most dealerships aren't paying attention to this element. We see a lot of dealerships treating Google Posts like social media, and it's absolutely not social media. Google Posts are free ads that appear on your Google Business profile. They're not social media. And you shouldn't share delivery photos of a happy customer standing next to a car. That stuff's great for social media. It does not work for Google Posts. And please, 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 for the love of God, do not share your brand feed as a Google Post because then everybody else that's sharing the brand feed has the exact same thing on their profile. And you should be using your Google Post to put something compelling there to help you stand out from the local competition. And when you create your post, pay attention to the thumbnail. Google crops to a smaller version of the photo, and you can't control what gets cropped. And it only shows a few lines of text. And if those few lines of text aren't compelling, nobody's going to click on that post. But The crops are kind of difficult to deal with because it's not consistent how it crops. It will change. You can load the same image in 5 times and get 5 slightly different crops. And you want to make sure that if you've got a car in it, you're not cropping out 70% of the car. Or if there's text in it, you're not cropping out the text, because then the thumbnail's not compelling and nobody's going to click on it. So we've created a Photoshop guide that will give you better control over what shows up in that thumbnail, and you can download the guide at the link right there. So to sum all of this up, you don't really have to know how SEO works. For most of this, you can just use common sense now that you understand that Google is pattern detection, and use some of these mistakes that I've shared today, and you'll be able to avoid bad SEO and in turn do good SEO, and you'll win. So if you're watching the recording of this session and you'd like to get your site scored as well, we'd be happy to score it. The more sites that we can score, the more data we have to share in presentations in the future. So you can just scan this QR code, give us your URL or multiple URLs if you're a dealership group. We'll score those sites and we'll send those scores back to you, and you can see how you compare to all of the averages that we shared today. Thanks for sticking with me through that absolute fire hose of information. Hopefully it did not explode your brain, and for everyone that hasn't seen Scanners, the guy's brain literally explodes. The truth is out there when it comes to SEO, and hopefully sharing mistakes with you today have given you the key to success in the future, and you'll all be able to break out of your shells and do better SEO in the future so that your dealership will live long and prosper. That was the most common SEO mistakes made by dealerships. If you've got any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I have an open email policy, so I will always answer any questions that people ask. If you'd like a copy of the slides, I'd be happy to send them to you as well. And if you are a sci-fi fan, there is a list of all the movies by order of release date at the end of the presentation. Thanks so much for watching.
Thanks for sticking around to watch the whole thing. But we're obviously out of time for this week's episode, so you know what that means. Put your hand on the screen right here. We totally just high-fived because you learned something awesome. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week for another episode of Local Search Tuesdays.